All right. What's up, everyone? We're going to make some bread. A lot of people have been asking for instructions on how to bake their own sourdough bread at home. And it's not hard, it just takes a lot of time, a lot of patience. Um, if you start today from scratch on sourdough, you can have your first loaf in about 2 weeks, maybe three. Um, so what we're going to do is I wanted to go through and do a series of videos of starting today. If you did want to start, where would you start today? And then day by day, what are the steps to get there? So when you're making bread, you need some kind of flour that you're going to use. You need water, and then you need some kind of yeast, something that's going to make the bread rise, right? Because that's the whole point of bread dough, is that it rises and it has that airy, fluffy texture to it. And usually people are used to making their own homemade bread. They use like active dry yeast or like bread machine yeast or something like that. So that's for regular bread. If you're going to make sourdough, the difference between regular white bread and sourdough is that with sourdough, you use what we call natural yeast or wild yeast. And the way that wild yeast works is instead of using something like this, um, you use your own cultured bacteria that ferments the wheat that you're using that makes it rise and grow. Um, so I have mine. This is my sourdough starter. So a starter is your yeast, your sourdough yeast. And so this is one that I've been keeping for, I don't know, 9 months, a year, or something like that. And I can take out a little bit of this and put it in some bread dough and turn it into beautiful sourdough anytime I want. It takes some time to get this. So what we're going to do is two things. The first thing is we're going to get started on our sourdough starter. We're going to make it. I'm going to show you how to start making yours at home. It's not that hard. It just takes time. And then what we're going to do is we're going to bake a loaf of bread today that's not sourdough. It's just white bread. It'll still be really good, but it'll be very simple. It'll be like the most basic version of this bread that you can make. So it's not hard. It will take about 12 hours. So if you're going to start this and do it in one day, start it in the morning. There are ways to do this over multiple days if you want. That's a little more complicated timing wise. So let's do our starter. The way the starter works is I'm going to start out one from scratch right now too. Where did it go? Let me find it. Okay, this is my new one. I just started this one. Okay, so the way that this works is uh, all it is flour and water. And so you mix flour and water and you let it sit and you let it ferment, and then you add some more flour and water and you let that ferment, and then you add some more flour and water. That's basically all it is. And you do that over and over again for a couple weeks. And what will happen is it will start to bubble and rise, and that's when you know that it is going to work for your loaves of bread. So how much do you do and how does it work? We'll talk a lot more about this over the many videos because we're going to do a ton of videos. I don't want to spend too much time on it. I just want you to get started on this so that a week from now or 2 weeks from now, we could bake a sourdough loaf together. Half wheat flour, half water. That's it. So I have like a half a cup of wheat flour, half a cup of water, mix it up, put it in a jar or something. Don't put the lid on all the way tight because this thing grows and expands and you don't want it to crack the jar. So just place the lid on loosely. Mix it up. So half cup wheat flour, half cup water, put the lid on loosely, and then just set it on your counter. You're going to leave it there and you can come back to it in a couple days. So in 2 or 3 days, we'll come back to it and talk about what it looks like to feed your starter and how to keep that going. All right, so we're gonna bake our loaf of bread. This is all it is. Get a bowl, bread flour. What's the difference between bread flour and all-purpose flour? Bread flour has more protein. That's it. Think protein, strong. You want your bread to be strong. That's why it's bread flour, right? And so we have so you're going to do 3.5 cups of bread flour. Measure that out, put that in your bowl. You're going to do 2 teaspoons of salt. You're going to do 2.25 teaspoons of yeast, of active dry yeast. And then you're going to do 1 2/3 cups of water. And you want that water to be room temperature, not faucet temperature. You want warmer than that because the warmer the water, the warmer the air in the area in your room, the more your yeast will activate, because you want your yeast to activate and build up. So what you're going to do is you're going to take those 4 ingredients, put the 3 dry ingredients in a bowl, mix those up so that there's no clumps, and then you're going to add your water and you're going to mix that. What you're going to notice is that this is going to be a very wet dough. It is not going to be a dry dough like what you're used to seeing maybe in a bread machine. It's going to be very wet. You're not going to be able to mix it with a spoon. You're going to have to get your hand in there and mix it up. Um, and you don't have to work it or anything like that. Just 30 seconds, mix it all up so that there's no more dry clumps in there. And then you're going to cover that bowl in plastic wrap, set it to the side, and you're just going to let it sit for 3 hours. And what's going to happen is over those 3 hours, it's going to rise a lot. So do that, get that started. 3.5 cups of flour, 2 teaspoons of salt, 2.25 teaspoons of yeast, 1 2/3 cups of room temperature water, and then mix it up with your hand, get it all nice and mixed. Saran wrap over top of the bowl, leave it on your counter for 3 hours. We're going to come back in 3 hours and see how that went. All right? See you in 3. Okay, so you did it. Look, it rose. It got a lot bigger. It should have been a lot bigger in your bowl now after you let it sit for 3 hours on your counter. And so now what are we going to do? Basically nothing. You're going to take your bowl and you're going to stick it in the fridge for another 3 hours. Like I said, it's just patience. There's no work involved here. It's just patience. So stick it in your fridge for 3 hours. Why? Okay, so the way that it works is when you put yeast into dough, into your flour mix, it's going to rise, right? The air, the room temperature air, and the mix of the yeast and the flour is going to cause it to rise. And what can happen is if you just let it sit on your counter, let's say you leave it on your counter for another 3 hours, it can overrise. And it's just like a balloon. If it overrises, it pops and it will actually deflate. And then there's no way to get that air back into your bread, and then it'll just be really dense and not good. So you're going to put it in the fridge. So why in the fridge, and why not just, hey, let's go to the next step and let's just start baking it? So with bread, one of the biggest tricks to bread, to making good bread, is having it take a long time. You want bread to sit for a long time. The longer it sits, the more the flavor will develop in it. So you want to make it sit as long as possible. When you put your dough into the fridge, the cool air in the fridge totally puts the yeast to sleep. So it's not going to keep rising. It'll make it so your dough can sit for longer without popping. You can put it into your fridge for as long as you want at this point. You can put it in there up to 3 days. And I think the general guidance is the longer you put it into the fridge, the better the bread's going to taste in the end. We don't have time for that, right? Because we want to make a loaf of bread today. So we're just going to put it in the fridge for 3 hours. That is the minimum to put it in the fridge at this step, is 3 hours. So put it in the fridge for at least 3 hours. And then in 3 hours, we'll take it out. It'll look exactly the same as it is now. And then we'll start to work with it. The other reason putting it into the fridge is good is, remember when we mixed it up, how wet it was? It was like clay, right? Like it stuck to your hands and stuff. That would be really hard to work with. That would be hard to put on your counter and knead like that. But once it's cooled down, it becomes a little bit harder and we can work with it and knead it. So the fridge is going to accomplish 2 things for us. Keep it from rising more. Actually, 3 things. Don't let it rise anymore. Let it develop the flavor still, and then let's cool it down so that we can work with it on the other side. So 3 more hours, see you on the other side, and then we're going to work with it on the counter. All right, for 3 hours in the fridge. This is close to 4. So it looks about the same as when I put it in. And let me just make sure. Recording. Okay, so it looks about the same. So now what we're going to do is we're going to dump it out onto a flat surface. This is just on my counter here. Put some flour down so it doesn't stick. It's going to be very sticky in the bowl. Remember, this is really wet dough. It's going to be a little bit easier to work with because it's cold. And so we're going to pull it out. Just be careful, let it just kind of fall out, pull it off the sides a little bit. There you go. And now what you're going to do is we're going to roll it into a loaf, okay? So we're going to take a little bit of this flour and put it on top of this. Let me just get a little bit more flour here to put on top so it's not so sticky to work with. All right, now flatten it out
a little bit, not like all the way. You're not doing cookie dough, right? So flatten out a little bit into a circle. And then to make our loaf, to roll it, we're going to do kind of like a burrito. So take one of your sides and you're going to fold it over about 2/3 of the way. Take your other side, fold it over so it's on top, and then you're going to roll it towards you like this. And there you go. So then we got this little guy like that. Right? Looks like a burrito. We're going to stick it right into our pan. Just oil the pan so it doesn't stick. You could use butter, oil. This is just an olive oil spray. Just so it doesn't stick in there. If you don't have one, a great tool, one of these, okay? I don't even know what it's called. Bench scraper? I don't know. So that you can, because like this is sticky and it's loose, but you can scoop it up pretty well. And then you can just drop it right into your loaf pan like that. Okay? Now, what you're gonna do, cover it in foil, okay? Remember, there's still yeast in here. We just took it out of the fridge, so now that yeast is gonna wake back up and want to grow. And so when you cover it in foil, you're gonna cover it, but leave it tented just in case it grows up out of the top so that it doesn't get held down by the foil. So you're gonna cover it like that. And then, once again, we wait 4 hours. Leave this out on your counter. It'll grow a lot more into the shape that we want it for our actual loaf. So 4 hours on the counter, we'll come back. Again, simple steps, just takes time. So I'm gonna leave this on the counter. We'll be back in 4 hours. See you there.
All right, 4 hours have gone by. It's grown a lot in here. You can take a look and peek at yours. It should have filled up, at least to the top of the pan, if not higher than that, which is why we tented it, if you remember. There's one thing I forgot that you can do. You can do it now. You could have done it before too, is put a little bit of oil on top of, like olive oil on top of your loaf, so that when it's growing, that if it does touch the top of that foil, that it doesn't stick to it. So I just did that right now for this one, since it was growing. And as it's growing, that 4 hours, just watch it. It might not actually take 4 hours. You just want it to grow up to be about that size, the right size. Mine, it actually hasn't been quite 4 hours yet, and it was kind of getting to the point where it looked like maybe it was gonna grow over the edge, and I didn't want that. So I'm gonna bake it a little bit early. So just watch it, and you can kind of get a sense for that. Um, if it looks like it's filled up the whole pan, and has risen, so then you can bake it. So baking it, this is how we do it. 475 degrees. It's really hot. It's a hot oven. And so what we're going to do is we're going to bake it with the tin foil on. We're going to do that for 20 minutes. And then we're going to take the tin foil off and bake it for another 20 minutes. Why? So with the foil on, what it's going to do is it's going to trap in all of that water that's in the dough, and it's going to basically steam the bread, and that's going to cause the bread to rise up even more and to keep some of that moisture so it doesn't burn off. It's also going to protect the crust so that the crust doesn't just burn, because if you put bread in the oven at 475 for 40 minutes, the crust is just going to burn. So it allows some of the bread to bake, being steamed, and protects the crust. That's what the first 20 minutes are. You take the second 20 minutes, you take the foil off, and then that gives an opportunity for the dough, or for the bread, for the crust, to turn like a dark brown. And so you want this to kind of, the expectation here of what it should look like isn't your regular like white loaf of bread that you'd buy wrapped in plastic at the store. You're wanting it to look more like the bread that you get in the bakery section that comes in like the paper bags, like that has kind of the dark brown crust that's a little bit harder, crispier, crunchier. That's what you're looking for your crust. So 475, 20 minutes foil on, 20 minutes foil off, and then you're going to pull it out, and then you want to stick it on a rack, a cooling rack, for 40 minutes, an hour, till it's fully cooled. It's still cooking. So if you try to cut into it right then, it might mess it up. It might be kind of gross or too wet or too not cooked enough. So let it cool. That's the hard part, but you do have to let it cool. I'm gonna let mine cool for an hour afterwards, and then we'll cut into it. So we'll see you after we pull it out of the oven. Okay, 40 minutes. 40 minutes in the oven, 40 minutes cooling at least. All right.
Okay, we're ready. It was in the oven 20 minutes with the foil on, 20 minutes with it off. I let it cool on a rack for about an hour. And now let's see what happens. We're going to cut into this and try it out. Are you ready, Maddie? Are you going to try it?
Yeah.
Are you going to be our taste tester?
Yeah.
See how it looks on the inside. Looks legit. All right. Let's see. You want the end piece or do you want a non-end piece? Should we try it together?
Yeah.
Should we see how this is? Okay. You try that piece. Here we go. You want to try some? That's pretty good, huh? All right. That'll make a good sandwich. You want some bread too? All right. All right, everyone. First loaf.
I give it an A+.
An A+. All right. First loaf down.
A+.
Second loaf coming up in a few days. We'll do another one. It'll be a little bit different. You'll see. We'll keep incorporating a couple of different techniques as we go. Different types of loaves, and yeah. All right. How was it? Good? Good. You want more?
Yeah.
That? All right. Say bye to everyone.
Bye.